So now that the hypervisor has been configured and rebooted, we can SSH back into it. However, it's no longer available on the DHCP IP address that it had, so we're going to SSH over to the AQ-CLI user. Once again, by default, it's on port 1289, but this time it's actually on our configured IP address. Let's say yes. Again, the default password is KaOS followed by the release version. Again, at the AppQ authentication area here, we just say admin for the default password. So at this point, you can run info sys and make sure that the system is up and running as you expect it to be. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the apps menu, and we're going to go ahead and install some app modules. So if we run the avail command, it actually shows us what app modules are currently available for this particular release of KaOS. Here you can see we've got our vKaOS, which is our virtualized guest platform. vKaOS is a special type of app module. It actually has the bootable kernel for the virtual guests or virtual servers. So that's going to have to be installed. And then the web module is a Nginx HTTPD server test module that we have up on the AppQ system right now. So to install it, we just run the install command. Now it's going to ask us which app queue we want to use. When you are just using the open source release of KaOS, there's a community and a development queue. If you purchase a KaOS support license from us, there's also a supported queue. But for this particular version, we're just using the open source release without the extensions for the support. So we're going to use the community version. And now it's going to ask us for the module to install, so we're going to tell it to install vKaOS, and hit enter. And here, let's just start the transfer. It goes straight off our site, and when it's complete, we'll go and tell you. And so if you do list, it'll show you now that it's got the app module vKaOS. It's come from the edge tree, which is the community queue, and the vendor is Carbon Mountain. So the next thing we're going to do is install the web module. So we run install, we say community, we tell it to grab the web module, and we hit enter. Again, it transfers that down from our website. Now what you'll notice here is it's actually transferred down 3 files. First file that's transferred down is the AQI file, which is the AppQ image file. This is the actual main environment and the application itself. Then it's downloaded 2 additional helper applications. It's downloaded the CLI extension module, and it's downloaded the app manager. The CLI extension module extends the AppQ CLI to allow the configuration of this particular app module, and then the app manager itself runs monitoring and configuration support on the hypervisor for that particular module. Now, both of those modules are on a per app module basis, so if you install a dozen or so app modules, you'll have a dozen or so CLI modules and app managers. So at this point, we need to configure a default VLAN for our virtual servers. So if you run list, you can see that there's no additional VLANs installed on the system, so we're going to create one. We're going to call it VLAN 200. We're going to make it a private VLAN, so it only exists within the confines of the hypervisor. And we're going to give it the IP address of, the network range of 10.200.200.0. It's going to be class C/24, and we're going to give the hypervisor the first IP address out of that particular range. So if you run list, you can see we have VLAN 200. We have our subnet, our CEDAR mask, and the number that are free, and obviously that's -1 for the hypervisor. The hypervisor IP address does not show up as being used, and here we have an indication that the VLAN is private, and if the VLAN was public, the external device that was mapped to this particular VLAN would be displayed there. So at this point, we go back to the apps menu and we do a list. You can see we've got the vKaOS kernel installed and we have the web module installed. So the first thing we need to do is create a configuration for the app module. So we run the configuration menu here, and it shows us whether or not we have any configuration groups installed. Now, a configuration group is a unique identifier for the app module. It's where we're going to store the configuration and so on for this particular module. so or an instance of this module. So we're going to call this our test web. Oops. Call it test web. We're going to base it off the community queue, and it gives us an option of what community queue modules are installed. And we're going to say use the web module. So we do a list. Here you can see we got a new configure called test web, and a module is called based off the web app module. So we run the app command to access the configuration for this particular module. It gives us an option to list what groups we want to use. We're going to use test web. And right now we're dropped then into the AppQ module framework. Here you can see that this module is actually for Nginx. We have the test web, which is our configuration group name, and the configuration group name is also stored in the prompt. And then this CLI is self-contained, so has various different configuration options. Here we're going to create a couple of sites. We're going to tell it to list on port 80. We're going to call this test.carbonmountain.com. And we're going to create a second one. We're going to run it on port 8080, and we'll call it admin.carbonmountain.com. And we're then going to list to make sure that they're there, and then exit out. And this drops us back then into the main CLI, at which point we can go back. Now, at this point, we've installed the app modules, we've created a configuration for the app modules, and we've created a VLAN for our virtual machines. So at this point, we can go ahead and create a virtual machine image. So if we do show VM, it shows which virtual machine images are on the system. It's a new installation, so there's already none built. So we'll use the create VM command to create one. We're going to call this demo. Asks us what app module we want to use. We're going to use the web app module. You don't have to tell it to specify the vKaOS module. The Hypervisor will figure that out itself and build that into the virtual machine image if it needs to. And finally, it asks us for a configuration group. So here, the only configuration group available for this menu or for this module is test web. And it will once again, like the firewall rules, ask us for additional app modules. You can install multiple app modules into a virtual machine image, or for this demo, we're just going to use the one. So if we do show VM, you can see that we've got our demo image with the web module. So at this point, the only thing left to do is to deploy it. So if we go to the VM menu, we do a list. You can see what virtual machines are running. Currently, there are no virtual machines. So we tell it that we're going to deploy. It's going to ask us what virtual machine image we want to use. We're going to use the demo virtual machine image. And the VLAN ID is 200. The number of VMs to deploy, we're going to tell it to deploy 4. We want to use 1 virtual CPU and 256 megs virtual RAM per VM. And then if you give it a few seconds, run the list. Here you can see that the VMs are starting up. Run list again. You can see that they're now active. They have a virtual PID, a name, and they've been automatically assigned IP addresses, and they belong to this demo app image. At this point, you can run some other commands. The info, for example, has information on the virtual bridges. You can see what virtual bridges exist on the system. You can see what virtual MAC addresses are assigned to which systems on the system, and you can see what virtual ports are also available on the system. As you can see here, we've created virtual MAC addresses and IPs for each of the VMs automatically out of that VLAN, and we've created virtual ports for each of the devices, each of the virtual machines. And that concludes the virtual machine setup.